Today, the world observes International Mother Language Day. It underscores the role of languages in promoting inclusion, serving as the primary means through which knowledge is transferred and cultures are preserved. Fundamental to the preservation of indigenous languages is their use and promotion on community media platforms. Let's chat about this further now. We speak to Schultz, who is the CEO of the Pan-South African Language Board, and Dr. Naledi Mbude-Mehana, who's the Deputy Director General of Transformational Programs at the Department of Basic Education. Good evening to you both, and thank you so much for your time. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Schultz. Let's start with the significance of a day like today.
Firstly, a very good evening to you and your viewers, and thank you very much for having me. I think today is really underpinned also in an international context where we're celebrating this as part of the International Decade for Indigenous Languages, which really tries to put the spotlight on languages that are in decline and specific emphasis on indigenous languages, where we need to ensure the preservation and protection of these languages affords not only speakers of this language, but also ensures that the written context in terms of corpus development is strongly done. Also importantly, which I might wish to add, is that today also marks the beginning of African Language Week. So it's a confluence of these events which makes it so important in us celebrating and commemorating how far we've progressed in terms of mother tongue based education, what mother language really means in terms of the nuances of speaking these languages, and how we as Pan-South needs to gear our programs as well as our structures to ensure that these languages do in fact enjoy parity of esteem. And this not only goes for all of our official languages, it also goes for various dialects, as well as the Khoi and San group of languages. So we're very, very proud to celebrate this significant occasion today.
And Dr. Mbude-Mehana, when you look at the significance of mother tongue teaching and learning, let's talk about it especially in the context of good learning outcomes. Didiji, you are on mute. Please unmute yourself.
No
problem. Go ahead.
When it comes to the learning outcomes of learners in South Africa, our assessment data indicates that it is English and Afrikaans children who are doing well. The advantage that they have in schooling is the fact that their home languages or mother tongues are used for teaching, learning, and assessment. Now, we have data and evidence in the department, empirical evidence, that has been pointing to the same thing, that Black African children who are in the majority experience the linguistic disadvantage because of the exclusion of their languages for epistemic access to the curriculum. So it is as important as that, getting access to what is actually taught, learned, and assessed in the schooling system.
And one would then ask, that yes, we talk about this now, but what would have been the impediments to still be talking about this as a possibility, DDG, 30 years on?
The impediment has not just been 30 years, it has been 350 years. There hasn't been a concerted effort to attend to the needs of Black children, particularly because we have always understood and thought that English is the language of liberation, and we have always equated education with English and Afrikaans to a large extent. So the impediments are in the mind of South Africans because English as a second language is a commodity. It forms part of the global English as a second language market. So anything that has to do with being sold as a product, you will always have those people who are selling English in packages that come to Africa particularly, so that those people who are in business selling English as a second language, they will always want the policies of African countries to be aligned to their business proposals because it benefits them in the process. Now, there's nothing wrong with selling English, but if it is at the expense of the epistemic learning trajectories of the majority of children in Africa, we are always going to be sitting in the same position.
Mr. Schultz, right on that point, we were in conversation earlier on with one of our colleagues who presents Xitsonga News, and we're talking about the fact that, even in some of the homes, you find that parents would equate English with good education, and at times you find that, children are not being encouraged to speak in their mother tongue, and you speak about languages in decline. How do we begin to not have a conversation that still touches on that, even in 2025 and beyond?
Thank you very much. And that touches to the heart of appreciation for all of our languages, whether they are official or whether they're some of the dialects which are spoken in South Africa, that the preservation efforts of these languages needs to have the appreciation of it being spoken in the homes. We're still finding that there's hegemonistic practices where it is believed that English affords better socioeconomic opportunity and it creates better pathways for people to advance within society. And this is the stigma that we are dealing with. And our plea is that with our partners such as the Department of Basic Education and the work that we are doing is that it remains important for society and for these communities to actually practice these languages, because a fundamental question that I'm always asked is to what extent are our languages and particularly our indigenous languages in decline? And the answer to that is we need to speak these languages, we need to have an appreciation for it, and in that way we'll be able to seek the decolonization efforts of the entire education system that will lock towards achieving academic performance as well.
DDG, right on that point, there is that view that when you look at teachers, for example, they may not be ready to enter the foundation phase and teach in the children's mother tongue, especially because what they are being taught in higher education may not necessarily translate to that. How do you begin to bridge the gap there?
You are raising a very important point of misalignment. And every time the results of the PEARLs internationally or the TIMS or the SACME come out, it is always the DBE that has to answer why kids can't read for meaning, why they cannot count. And higher education institutions have never taken responsibility for that misalignment. That DBE does not produce educators. It is higher education that has failed, just like we have done so at the level of basic education, to make sure that we provide the educators that are supposed to be going out and teaching those learners, particularly in the foundation phase. Now, if you do that, you impact foundational learning. Now, the graduates that come out of BEd foundation phase programs, there is no higher education university, besides, I think, two, Fort Hare University, and the beginnings of that, they started in Limpopo many years ago. So we have a higher education system that has not moved, that has not recalculated, impacting what we call foundational learning. So it is important. We've started that discussion with higher education, DHET, and higher education institutions to start the process of ensuring that we transform higher education in the same way that DBE has started.
And are they receptive?
They must be. That's the law. We must align demand and supply.
And when you listen to this, Mr. Schultz, because one thinks about the fact that if there's still this disconnect, even between higher education itself and the basic education department, which then would mean the quality of what the teachers would be taught is also coming into question here, because now you speak about readiness. Grade 4s are now going to be taught in their mother tongue. You speak about readiness and the importance of ensuring that whatever it is that they're being taught in class is actually accurate and something that they can even use in the future.
So this is where Pensel plays quite a strategic and a critical role as the ultimate quality assurer in terms of establishing orthography rules, in terms of ensuring that the standardization and the authentication and verification of languages in terms of the corpus development does undergo the necessary rigor. And as a result, our national language body, as well as our national language units, are playing a critical role in this regard. The other part of your question in terms of what whether there's sufficient cooperation between the two spheres of basic as well as higher education, I believe the intention is there. And the program is all referred to as the incremental introduction of African languages, so that we ensure the necessary quality assurance, that teacher readiness is put in place, and that learners are not deprived, and that the quality of the education is not any less in terms of what the offerings are going forward. So we're very proud to partner with them, and we believe we're certainly going in the right direction, and that the levels of cooperation are there between these two respective spheres in the education system.
So, Didiji, there's something else that, we often talk about interchangeably, and I wonder if you can be able to just give us a distinction here. What's the distinction between mother tongue education and mother tongue-based bilingual education? Is there any difference at all?
Thank you very much for that question, and most people ask that question. Mother tongue education in the ideal world is access to the language of children and using it as the basis of education. Now, in the South African context, where there are 12 official languages, you do not want to place a premium only on the language of the child. It is very important that as children start school, it is important that their languages are used as languages of learning, teaching and assessment, and at the same time, in that same journey or trajectory, we also intentionally introduce other languages, because our constitution says multilingualism is the norm. So we move away from the orientation of language just being a right to certain people and not worry about learning other languages. This has plunged South Africa into a situation where in higher education institutions, we don't have enough people who speak African languages because they've never been required to learn African languages. So Mr. Schultz's earlier reference to the incremental introduction of African languages is because whether you speak isiXhosa or isiZulu or English or Afrikaans, you have to go through a system that allows you to learn the other's language so that you can be able to service people better. Whether you are in hospitals as a doctor, or whether you're in schools or an engineer, it is incumbent upon an education system to ensure that everybody in the system goes through a bilingual or multilingual education system, and not one where you only preoccupy yourself with your language and not worry about the fact that you are unable to speak an African language in Africa. That is what the difference is.
And as a final one then, Mr. Schultz, I hear the DGGs talking about the importance of ensuring that you attach language to ensuring that you see the other person you're speaking to, because that also makes them feel comfortable as you are helping them, whether in healthcare, at school, and everywhere else.
Yeah, and I think it's essential to acknowledge that language transcends the realm of just basic communication. It actually provides a repository of our cultural heritage in South Africa. It allows us to have collective memories and future aspirations that we as a country and as the various language groups and ethnic groups aspire to. And it's not only the pedagogy that you'll find in universities, but also fundamentally shapes the cognitive frameworks of all of our particular learners in the country. So I think in conclusion, mother language, in my view, constitutes a cornerstone of our very identity, and it necessitates the recognition and the celebration within the societal discourse that we often find ourselves in.
So in the spirit of the day, that is today, I'm going to ask you to say good night to our viewers in your mother tongue. I'm starting with you, Mr. Schultz.
You're putting me on a spot, so I could say good night in so many ways, but I'll say good night and goeienaand and sambonani.
Siyabonga. Didiji?
Ilale kakuhle mzonsundu, sibonane ngomso, enkosi.
Enkosi kakhulu for ixesha lenu, nibe nobusuku obuhle. Siyabonga kakhulu.